Hello, everybody. I am Rhea Aoun-Clavel, Event Director of TRUSTECH. Thank you for being with us today and welcome to the first episode of our COVID-cast series, a limited series of podcasts TRUSTECH is launching to discuss how the coronavirus is impacting the payments, identification, and security sectors. In this fortnightly rendezvous, John DEVLIN, Principal Analyst and Founder of Paid Strategies and host of TRUSTECH's Innovation Stage, will share his insights and expertise based on his recent report, The Impact of COVID-19 on Smart Cards and Embedded Security. In this first podcast, we will take a closer look at the payments sector and how consumer behavior and retail is changing in response to COVID-19 for both in-person and online transactions. We're delighted to welcome John, who will tell us why COVID-19 is the biggest disruptor and accelerator of digital payments that we have ever seen. Wow, that's a pretty big statement, John. So can you tell us first how COVID-19 has impacted the way we spend and accept payments?
Thank you, Rhea. Yes, no, certainly it's quite clear that people's spending habits are changing around the world as a direct result of COVID-19 and the disruption, the lockdowns that we've been experiencing in many countries. And we believe that this will result in long-lasting change, accelerating the trends that were already taking place and bringing about much faster adoption and implementation of digital payments and alternatives to cash. I think in terms of the acceptance of physical payments, the primary means will continue to be point of sale terminals for card payments. In most countries, we don't expect that to change too drastically, but we are seeing a much quicker movement towards mobile and alternatives in-app payments in some countries. And there's been a surge in demand from small and micro businesses, mobile workers who had not transitioned from cash. There have been much greater numbers being reported by the likes of iZettle and Square in terms of the mobile point of sale devices that they provide for accepting card payments. So, and that all relates to contactless as well as higher value. So it's not a uniform picture, it's a mix. So for example, just relating to cash here in the UK, ATM withdrawals are down 50% what they were at the start of the year and where they would normally be. And we're also seeing that other countries, though, on the other hand, are having much higher rates of cash withdrawal. I think people are worried that they may not be able to access their money in the banks either physically or be able to withdraw it. So there's been a bit of a surge in some countries. But what is clear, though, overall, is that non-cash payments are increasing much more quickly and becoming more widely used than before. I mean, if we look at in-person payments, we've seen cash usage declining in many countries, and greater efforts are being made in developing economies too to become more digital. The shift, the direct response to COVID-19 is that many countries have increased their contactless spending limits for contactless bank cards. And we've seen that contactless is now accounting for as much as 70% or more of card spending at point of sale. This is particularly so in countries like the Nordics, Canada, Australia, and the contactless share in these countries has increased by over 10% in less than 2 months at the start of the year. And generally there's a preference, a greater preference being expressed by people for contactless cards over cash, and that they will be using and spending less cash in the future. There are some particularly interesting statements from Square highlighting this. So on the 1st of March, they were calculated that 8% of their business customers were effectively cashless. And by that, they said that 95% or more of the customers' revenues or business turnover was non-cash. And so by April 23rd, less than 8 weeks later, this had increased to 31%, which is a massive jump. And that's being repeated in other countries as well. Australia went from 6% to 36%, Canada 9% to 48%, and here in the UK it went from 10% to 60%, where we have a particularly high level of contactless adoption. So it's definitely a trend, and we see this. It might fall back a little, but we think it will continue to a higher degree than 6 months ago. Similarly with e-commerce, been massive increases being reported globally. ACI worldwide said some sectors had seen online spending increase 81% year on year in May, and in some it was more than double. Overall, the value of the online transactions has increased by 23% globally, they said as well. I know in the UK it hit a high of 33% of total retail sales were now online, either PC, browser, or mobile. Similarly in the US, it doubled year on year in May. And companies like Square Cash, Venmo, Swish are reporting much faster growth now as well.
Very interesting, John. Can you tell us what are the downsides to the changes we're experiencing in the payments market?
Yes, so there are certainly some concerns and pitfalls to be aware of. I think one particularly important, and it's been an issue from checks and cash to cards to bank access throughout this sector, is that it's important to ensure that no one is left behind or excluded, particularly as we're seeing a faster migration away from cash. Typically, you'd be thinking about the elderly, migrants, the young, other commonly unbanked demographics. So financial inclusion needs to be carefully managed so that no one is excluded and find themselves unable to access some services, goods, or merchants. Building on this, we saw that the issuance of contactless cards overtook contact only 2 years ago in 2018. And this year we expect contactless to account for about 63% of all cards. So as a result of this, about half of the payment cards in circulation are contactless. But this means obviously half the cards aren't. So it can't be too focused on contactless in many countries. And similarly, mobile is growing. It's at a lower level, but it is increasing. But not everyone has a smartphone or has made the move to mobile payments. So it's important for merchants to ensure that all customers are comfortable using their checkouts and making payments, whether contactless, online, or they risk losing customers as a result. So I would say that as well with the rapid adoption of these solutions directly in response to the virus, it's possible that there could be a greater risk of poor implementation or customer understanding, and so businesses will want to avoid poor or unreliable customer experience, because that would result in increased abandonment at the payment stage and during checkout. So there's also a greater risk of fraud if all the checks and processes are not properly implemented. I mean, it should be properly managed, but I know obviously with companies reacting very quickly that all the boxes on the checklist may not get ticked. And finally, I would say that with digital payments, there's naturally a greater production of data, so there will be a need for all stakeholders to be much more aware of data protection and cybersecurity, and how they, when they're implementing these processes.
So finally, do you think we will see more new technologies added to traditional payment methods as a result of COVID-19 in the payments market?
Yes, I think for sure. I said that these trends had already begun. There were some new solutions that were starting to pick up pace, and we think these will increase. just focusing on cards for a moment, I think that there will be increased demand for contactless and more mobile usage as well. It's been proven as a attractive way for people to pay, and I think we'll see we'll see a little bit of a blurring and a merging between in-person verification for payments and online. So already companies are looking at how smartphones or biometrics might be used to authorize an online transaction, for example. I think that your greater interest in touchless payments, whether in person or remote. I don't think there's going to be much of an increase in share of cards over the 63% I mentioned before for shipments this year for contactless. I think that those programs are well established. There may be a greater uptake over the next couple of years as banks respond to consumer demand, but I don't think that's likely to happen this year as banks are primarily focused on maintaining their existing card programs and are unlikely to react this year to speed things up, but I think that could happen in the future. Biometric cards is something that's been bubbling over for the last year or two, and we're in the pilot phase still. There's going to be a greater push from the industry, from solution providers to promote biometric cards as a way of overcoming spending limits with contactless, and to provide more security and comfort for the consumer, as well as for the merchant and the card issuer. But again, with economies likely to be in a bit of difficulty, and you're already seeing the first ones in recession, I'm not sure if banks are going to go on a bit bigger or wider investment programs at this time. So again, I think it will happen, but not directly now. And then we're seeing other areas around tokenization, innovation around point of sale terminals, incorporating more solutions with QR codes, and there's going to be more interaction around those areas. I know Visa and MasterCard have been very active, as has PayPal. Samsung's getting involved as well now in a number of programs across different regions, countries, continents. So it's quite widespread how much this is happening and how quickly this is happening as well. And I think we'll see new ways of paying as well, or changes to the way we're paying. So already seen online for a while how companies like Klarna are doing spread payments for transactions, and I wouldn't be surprised if that type of approach was put into physical payments. So when you're making a card payment, do you wish to pay all now or to spread these payments over 3 or 6 months, offering more credit to help merchants maintain business levels and consumer spending as economies start to slow down. So I think that there's definitely a number of approaches that we'll see there. And but to conclude, really, I just want to say that I think that, going back to the opening statement, COVID-19 is perhaps the biggest disruptor and accelerator of digital payments that we've seen. There's a huge amount of change happening, driven by user behavior, adapting to new circumstances, but being enabled by technology. So these changes had already started, but this has definitely accelerated this all as a result.
Thank you so much, John, for this fascinating insight. We hope you enjoyed this first COVID cast with John Devlin. Join us again in 2 weeks for the second episode of this limited series. Until then, have a wonderful day.